Welcome back to the program. And of course, we'll get to the very next leg of our conversation. And this time, we want to look at the performance of subnationals. Every year, BudgIT puts together, they do the maths and calculate the performance of each state in terms of their fiscal performance to see how well they did in terms of increase or decrease in IGR, their dependency on FAC, how much they spent on health, education, and all of those numbers, as well as, per capita for each state. So it's all about looking at the economics or macroeconomics of every state of Nigeria. And I can tell you for free, some are trying, some are not doing well. And that's why they're here to break it down for us. We're being joined in the program from our Abuja studio by the head Research and Policy Advisory at BudgIT, Mr. Iniobong Hussein. Mr. Hussein, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for having me.
All right, I hope that at some point my producer will get us some of the slides so that we get to see what you'll be talking about. But whilst we're waiting for all of that to come to be presented, maybe give us a highlight of some of the discoveries in terms of numbers that BudgIT has found for the states for the year 2023. I know you index them you grade the states depending on what parameters you're looking at. So walk us through briefly as we begin to dig deep.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me. Good morning, Nigerians. So the State of States is BudgIT's flagship product that is conducted annually. And we do this to sort of ascertain the comparative viability, sustainability of the 36 states. So we try to see how states, given their revenue functions in the Constitution, are able to meet up with their expenditure obligations. And so we have 5 indexes that we use to assess the states. For the first index, we try to see how states theoretically can meet their operating expenses, which is, the salaries, wages, pensions, what you have as personnel cost, overhead cost, and then the interest on loans with what they are able to generate internally. So basically, just to assess the domestic resource mobilization capacity of the states. The second index, looks at how states are, improving efforts towards raising IGR year on year. So how have states fared year on year with regards to IGR growth, whether it's with their tax revenue or non-tax revenue. The third index tries to see how states are looking at all the sources of revenue, whether it's the FAC receipts, the internally generated revenues, or what they get from aids and grants, how states are able to meet their operating expenses and loan repayment obligations with the total revenues that accrue to them within a fiscal year. And then the fourth index is like a composite index, 4 mini indexes that tries to look at the debt sustainability of states. So we look at the foreign debt as a percentage of total debt. We also look at the total debt to total revenue. We look at the debt service to total revenue, and then the personnel cost to total revenue. And the last index, Index D, tries to see how states are prioritizing capital expenditure to recurrent expenditure to sort of address the infrastructure gaps that exists along the length and breadth of the Federation. So this is a summary of what the methodology looks like.
Okay, so let's begin to look at them maybe closely. I think the one you call, let's say, Index A, where you talked about Index A looks at ability of states to meet their operating expenses, which has to do with recurrent expenditure, with only their internally generated revenue. Because part of the conversation, we want to be able to say, this state is doing well, this other state is not doing well, else you're just going to be speaking to a bubble. So if you use this Index A that has to do with, if they were to fund their operating expenses, which is recurrent expenditure by IGR, which of the state, because that speaks to viability. It speaks to the ability to depend less on FAC. It speaks to the ability to not go belly up in case FAC is not coming. So maybe you walk us through the state and what you found to be the drivers of the performance and what is responsible for the poor performance?
Yeah, so for you to score well on Index A, it's either two things. It's either you are reducing your operating expenses with specific focus on your overheads, or you are significantly increasing your IGR so that it's buoyant enough to cater to your operating expense. So what we've seen, and not just with this year, but over the years, is that for states like Rivers, for states like Lagos, that usually have very significant IGR, they're able to meet up, a large chunk of their operating expenses with what they're able to generate internally. Alternatively, for states like Bayelsa, despite, the huge FAC receipts that accrue to them and the relatively small size of the state in terms of population, they have very large operating expenses. I mean, they have the third highest overhead costs among the 36 states, despite being one of the smallest states. And then they have, one of the lowest IGRs as well, meaning that they would require about 8 times their IGR or more to be able to meet their operating expenses. So for states that intend to score higher on Index A, you either have to, intensely increase your capacity to mobilize revenues internally, or you have to drastically reduce your operating expenses, which is anchored on, the cost of governance and, how you manage your debt with regards to the cost of loans, the utilization of those loans, and what you have to repay when those loans are due.
Mr. Effiong, this breakdown that you have presented is quite telling. Just the 5 indexes, there is no above average performance. All the highest here is 30%. And I want you to speak to debt sustainability because the benchmark explains itself to be that the debt sustainability of the states using 4 major matrices: public debt, foreign debt, debt as a percentage of revenue. So which states do you find to be floundering in this category?
So across board, I would say that if you look at the 3 other indexes, debt to total revenue, debt service to total revenue, and then your personnel cost to total revenue, majority of the states are within the threshold. But when you look at the foreign debt to total debt, that's where there's cause for alarm. So there are 8 states that have their foreign debt that is more than 50% of their total debt. What this means is that these states are highly susceptible to exchange rate volatility. Now, the foreign debt year on year increased by just about 4.1%. But as a result of the devaluation of the naira against the dollar from about 889 naira on December 31st, 2024 to about 1,500 naira to the dollar in June 2024, the debt stock of the states increased by about 2.74 trillion naira. So that tells you that for states that have a large chunk of their debt owed in, in foreign currencies, that state, for every time the naira devalues against the dollar, that state would require more naira to be able to procure dollars to pay back those loans. So those are states that are at risk with regards to meeting their loan repayment obligations. But with regards to the debt service to total revenue ratio, averagely, that's still within threshold. The debt to revenue ratio, with the threshold at 200%, still within appreciable limits. And also the personnel cost to revenue ratio, still within appreciable limits. But we need to sound a note of warning here. What we have not been able to do with the state of states is also to ascertain the quality of expenditure. And this also anchors on the utilization of loans. So whilst states acquire loans to, implement certain projects, it's not clear in their audited financial statements what exactly those loans are used for. There are summary statements on, the utilization of loans, but with specific to projects, it's not clear. And it's important that this is made clear because in this time where there's a fiscal squeeze, where there's a shrinking fiscal space for the states, it behoves on the state governments to mobilize revenues, but to spend those revenues efficiently. States will need to rationalize their expenditure. You see the proliferation of, building of airports in some states, international conference centers, when there's very little, activities in that state requiring those centers. You see state governments building state-of-the-art, religious centers, as against investing these loans or these meager revenues that accrue to them in productive sectors of the economy or in viable projects that over the long term would be able to pay back those loans as a result of the economic activities that have emanated from the projects implemented with those loans.
So very quickly, just before Jeffrey comes in, which states have a huge foreign debt burden?
So you have Kaduna State and Edo State leading the pack. With Kaduna State, Kaduna has over 80% of his loans, as dollar-denominated loans. And then you have Edo at I think, a little above 60% of their loans being dollar-denominated. But then you have 8 states that have more than 50% of their loans, as foreign loans.
So, Ms. Olsen, I want to go to the document that Budget has prepared, and let's use a case study. I'm very curious to helping us to break this down. Bayelsa State. When I look at the overall fiscal performance ranking, Bayelsa is at 35 over 36. That's horribly poor, just slightly above Jigawa. And if you go to the state of state in 2022, which is just a year before, Bayelsa State was the highest state, the state with the highest dependency on FAC, over 90%. What exactly do you think they can do differently to better their fortune? Because it looks like it doesn't get better. Look, from the records available to us that Budget has done and from other numbers, if all the states in Nigeria as companies and then the FAC allocation doesn't come, Bayelsa will be the first to go down.
So there's a lot that needs to happen across board on revenue mobilization, on expenditure efficiency, and on debt management. If I speak to the revenue mobilization, in quite still a number of states, tax collection can be better, right? We feel that it should be digitized. There should be very minimal contacts with cash, because as you know, with every system, cash is usually prone to corrupt practices. When people interface with cash, there's a tendency for them to, for sharp practices to occur. So we think that the process should be automated. I mean, there's a lot of technology. There's the use of USSD that people can pay for rates, whether it's in the markets, whether it's with the keke riders. So you necessarily do not need boots on the ground to collect these taxes, because what happens is you find a large, chunk of those taxes, levies, and rates going to middlemen, while a small chunk of it, gets into the coffers of the state. So if we find ourselves in a situation where, while citizens are paying a lot at their own level, you see that not a lot is reflected in the accounts of the government. A lot is rather going to middlemen. And when it comes to tax equity as well, we see that the top 1-2% are equally not paying their own fair share of taxes. And this is because the states have not, been able to properly enumerate and drive compliance in that regard. And so we believe that the states, using tax intelligence, would be able to properly identify who the top earners are, what their effective, tax obligations should be, and then find also ways to also drive compliance. And I believe the Taiwo Yedele Committee, is also looking at this in this regard. What we also think needs to happen is the harmonization of taxes. The NGF, has also done some work in this regard, to try to see how states, would harmonize taxes and we get to a single digit. Ditto the Taiwo Oyedele committee. But we need to, expedite the process. Because if you go to some local governments across the country, there are different kinds of levies, rates, fees that business owners, small, artisanal, business owners would have to pay. In one instance, somebody who transported agricultural products from somewhere in the north to Lagos had to pay for 77 different stickers. And this cost is passed further down to the consumer. You wonder why inflation is at that rate. Also, the states need to fully operationalize their treasury single account. You still have some states that have multiple accounts running into hundreds operated by the different MDAs of government. And in a system like that where you have multiple accounts running, for the state, centrally, you are not able to properly monitor what comes in and goes out. States like Kano are trying to, clean up the process, close all of those accounts and ensure that there's one revenue account and one expenditure account, as the case may be. Then if you come to expenditure efficiency as well, a lot of Nigerians would, still believe that, and it's evident that there's a lot that the states still need to do with regards to reducing the cost of governance. So while citizens have been told to tighten their belt to adjust to, the two key policy reforms brought about by the new administration, it doesn't seem like the political class are equally adjusting. It would seem that, it's still business as usual for them. You still see the long motorcades. You still see political office holders trying to run people off the road with their sirens and all of that. And so they have not shown that it's business unusual, as the case may be. They have not shown that the times are hard. You still see state governments prioritizing non-essential expenditures like airports as against improving the quality of healthcare, improving the state of road infrastructure in their states, improving the quality of education at that level, improving access to water, sanitation, and health. If you look at the budget implementation reports of the states, I mean, it's also in the State of States report. If you look at the health allocation, cumulatively by the 36 states, it was, I think, at about 2.3 trillion. But disbursements to, those activities in that sector was only about 1.3 trillion.
And
so
that's
less than 60%.
Yeah, and that's where I want you to speak to, Mr. Hussein. Your breakdown says that it represents a 58.16% budget performance as against what was deployed to it. And this captures 36 states of the Federation, I believe. I want you to speak to the implications of this. What happens to the remaining 42% of the budget? And how should citizens be asking questions about these sums allocated to their health sectors?
So the excuse often put forward by the state government is that they are not able to meet up with their revenue projections. But we find this false because we've discovered that it's more of a prioritization issue. So in certain states, in the year where they claimed they were not able to meet up with their revenue projections, they found 15 billion naira to build an airport, as against funding their primary healthcare development agency with a 4.8 billion naira budget. In the same year where they claim, the revenue projections were not met, that's why the disbursements to the health education sector wasn't optimal. That is the same year that they find funds to send people on pilgrimages abroad. They find funds to build state-of-the-art religious worship centers. They find the funds to build international conference centers. And so for us, we feel is a prioritization issue. And the implications for this, especially at the local level where you have the primary healthcare centers, is that people do not have access to basic healthcare. If you look at certain labor wards in some PHCs across the Federation, a dog would not agree to give birth in those wards. They do not have access to basic materials, whether it's with syringes, whether it's to basic drugs, with regards to the welfare of even some of the health workers at the local government level. In some states, even with the 30,000 naira minimum wage, there are some workers that at that level that collect 25–30% of their salaries monthly. What quality of care do you expect from that type of facility? In those facilities, there's no access to pipe-borne water, there's no access to electricity, and yet the state governments find funds to build airports that probably 98% of the citizens would not be able to use.
All right, Mr. Olsen, I'm happy. Our first set of guests, one of them had mentioned this issue of airport, and now you're on it. I'm sure it's really upsetting Nigerians. We had the FAN MD one day here, and she did mention that out of the 22 or 21 airports in Nigeria, only about 2 or 3, about 3 are viable. The other ones are being subsidized, and governors are still going to build airports. Some have built airports, no kite has even flown through those airports. And the lady said, look, rather than building airports, why don't you boost productive activity that would necessitate airport? It's just, as you said, priority issues. So, but I want to take you beyond the numbers without trying to drag you into politics. From what you see, because we can track where the monies are coming from and how much is coming, whether it's from FAC, IGROA, grants, or AIDS, or whatever it is coming from. Expenditure is always where the detail is very, very sketchy. We can't really get those details because, of course, you know why we can't get those details sometimes. So for you, from what you have seen, will restructuring the country play a better role in terms of helping these states to be able to do better? Or is just going to be just empowering people to be reckless even to a higher level at the end of the day? Because if you can't manage the little one you have, if we now say control your resources, how would they manage it from where you sit?
So from what we've seen across board, there is no evidence that the money that has been available to states have been utilized. I mean, if you compare the states that receive FAC to the states that don't, there is no significant difference in the living standards of the citizens in those two states. So with the data available, there is no evidence that just by providing more revenue to the states, that they would be able to judiciously utilize those revenues in improving the quality of lives of the residents of their states. So the argument should go beyond, just getting more, because we've seen that in instances where the states get more, they just become more ambitious with bigger and more expensive elephant projects. And so just making more available to the states is not enough, right, to guarantee the improvement in the quality of lives of citizens of the country. A lot more needs to happen. And there's very little that is said on consequence management. If you look at the state governments, you would find very little effort publicly at this, by the state government in punishing erring officers, public officials that have fleeced the resources of the state. You find very few state governments. I'm struggling to find one instance where you hear a state government prosecuting a public official who has stolen public funds. The efforts, the anti-corruption drive is usually driven by... for bringing all of this to the fore. And we're going to get the full report eventually to see in detail, because I know this is more like a synopsis of what happened yesterday in terms of the presentation from BudgIT. We must thank BudgIT for doing a great work. And maybe we'll try to encourage you guys to go to how they spend this money so we know the ones that are stolen. Maybe we'll have a record to that effect, and the ones that are properly utilized. Mr. Eniobangu Sen, Head Research and Policy Advisory at BudgIT, joining us from our Abuja studio. Thank you so much for coming on the program. Yeah, thanks for having me, and have a lovely day.
You too. All right, we'll take a quick break and get away from all the serious talk and bring... Yeah, this is also a serious talk, but lighter in their texture. We're talking about the creative economy. We're going to be joined by an actress right here on the program. Stay with us to find out who.